The morning of November 10, 1995, arrived in Port Harcourt with a sky the color of gunmetal and a silence that felt deliberate, as if the air itself had taken a long, uneasy breath. Inside the old military prison, 9 men waited in cells barely large enough to stretch their legs. Ken Saro-Wiwa paced a narrow strip of floor. The writer and activist who had carried the voice of Ogoniland to the world now reduced a prisoner watched by armed guards. Alongside him were Barry named Kyobel, John Quinen, Saturday Dobi, Nodu Iyawo, Daniel Buku, Paul Levura, Felix Noate, and Barry Bobera. The men the government now called criminals, but whom their people already called martyrs. All appeals for clemency had failed. The night before, envoys from the Commonwealth and the United Nations had tried one last time to reach General Sani Abacha, urging him to halt the executions, warning of global outrage. But the military ruler remained unmoved. He had already signed the death warrants. The tribunal that condemned them had been swift and closed. Witnesses bribed or threatened, evidence of military brutality declared irrelevant. Abacha's government wanted finality, not fairness. Just after dawn, soldiers surrounded the prison yard, rifles at the ready, their faces set in expressionless masks. Outside the gates, families of the condemned waited in vain for permission to enter. Mothers clutched photographs, fathers gripped rosaries or prayer beads. They were kept back behind a cordon of armed police as trucks rumbled into the yard, carrying the heavy timber of the gallows. Ken Saro-Wiwa had always promised to meet death with words. Before he was led away, he managed to speak to the guard, a final message for the world. The struggle of Ogoni people, he said, could never be silenced. The others followed in green procession. One by one, they were taken to the news. There was no public announcement, no chance for last goodbyes. Within hours, it was done. 9 lives extinguished in the damp morning air. News of the hangings shot across the world like a shockwave. In Lagos, students poured into the streets, defying soldiers and tear gas. In London, protesters marched on Shell headquarters, accusing the oil giant of complicity. From Washington to Johannesburg, governments condemned the killings. Nigeria was suspended from the Commonwealth. Sanctions tightened. International newspapers carried black-bordered front pages that simply read, "Nigeria hangs 9." Ken Saro-Wiwa's name became a rallying cry for environmental justice. Yet, inside Nigeria, the crackdown deepened. Soldiers swept through the Niger Delta, sealing Ogoniland from journalists and aid workers. Checkpoints multiplied. Villages already scared by raids in 1994 now faced collective punishment. Farmlands lay poisoned by spills. Creeks shimmered with rainbow slicks of oil. Children carried the cough of gas flares in their lungs. The silence that followed the executions was not peace, but a fearful pause. But the story did not end with the gallows. In death, Ken Saro-Wiwa's words only grew louder. His writings, smuggled from prison and published abroad, became manifestos for a new generation of activists. Mosop, battered but unbroken, reorganized in exile and in secret, human rights organizations launched campaigns demanding accountability from Shell and the Nigerian state. International courts began slow investigations into corporate complicity, planting seeds of legal challenges that would surface decades later. Across the Delta, ordinary Ogoni people turned grief into quiet resistance. Women rebuilt schools with scrap lumber. Fishermen formed cooperatives to share what little unpolluted water remained. Youth groups documented oil spills with battered cameras, creating records that would one day serve as evidence. Every act of survival became a form of deviance. Years passed. General Abacha's regime fell in 1998. His sudden death ending one of Nigeria's harshest military dictatorships. Civilian rule returned, and with it came new inquiries into the crimes of the past. International pressure forced Shell to admit some responsibility for environmental damage and to pay limited compensation to Ogoni families, though the land remains scarce. In 2011, the United Nations Environment Programme released the landmark reports confirming what the Ogoni had long known. Decades of oil exploitation had poisoned soil and water so deeply it could take a generation to heal. Today, the creeks of Ogoniland still carry both memory and warning. Mangroves grow where villages once stood. The air sometimes carries the faint, sweet metal scent of crude, a reminder of how greed and power can suffocate a people and a land. Yet, the legacy of the Ogoni Nine endures. Ken Saro-Wiwa's face appears on murals in Lagos, on banners in climate marches from Berlin to Nairobi. His words are quoted by young activists fighting new battles for environmental justice in every corner of the globe. For those who walk the quiet paths of Buri or stand on the banks of the Ogoni River at dusk, the struggle is not an old story but a living presence. They speak of the executions not as an ending but as a spark, one that lit a movement larger than Nigeria, larger than the Delta, a movement that continues to demand that the wealth beneath the earth never again be valued above the lives who walk upon it. And so the saga of the Ogoni people closes this chapter, not with silence, but with an echo that refuses to fade. From the moment soldiers stormed their villages in 1993 to the gallows of 1995 and far beyond, the Ogoni have shown that even in the face of overwhelming force, the truth of a people's dignity cannot be hanged. This is their legacy, an unbroken song carried on the wind over the breeze, a promise that the world will remember what happened in Ogoniland and why it must never be allowed to happen again.